50 million people in China, equivalent to the population of France, are ethnically not Chinese at all. Why are there so many non-Chinese in China? Most of these peoples were incorporated into China more than 2,000. An immensely advanced civilization flourished in China. It was during this period, during the Han Dynasty, that China expanded her borders north, south, and west. By doing so, she overran most of the agrarian peoples living in these areas. There are, in fact, 54 different minority peoples in China. The ethnic Chinese, or Hans as they call themselves, traditionally looked down on these minority peoples as being totally inferior. But from the very first, the communist government insisted that the minority people be treated as full and equal members of the Chinese nation. But age-old attitudes can't be abolished overnight, and the Chinese admit that among some members of the older generation, this sense of racial superiority still exists. So that these racial prejudices are not carried over to the next generation, Chinese children at a very early age, by dances and stories, are taught to respect the minority peoples as equal members of the great Chinese family. These children, for example, are dressed in Mongolian costume and are pretending to be riding horses as the Mongolians do. In this program, we will visit 3 areas where minority peoples make up the majority of the local population. Yunnan province is the home of many nationalities. The Mongolians live mostly in northern China. But let's first look at the far western province of Xinjiang, the home of the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs. Xinjiang is the largest of China's provinces, larger in area than Spain, France, Italy, and Germany together. New cities and new industries are springing up rapidly in Xinjiang, but in relation to its vast size, it is still very sparsely populated. Among the minorities, many are farmers and herders living in the open grasslands. In Xinjiang, they breed horses that are sent to all parts of China. Wild horses still roam the plains and are captured and tamed. Inner Mongolia, another world. I traveled many miles in this sturdy Chinese car. Occasionally, I went by camel. These Mongolians, who had never seen a Westerner before, treated me with almost overwhelming kindness. Private ownership of property has never existed in Mongol societies. Land, camels, sheep, and cattle were tribally owned. This made the transition to collective ownership under the communist government relatively easy. Veterinary teams now travel from herd to herd to inoculate the sheep. Winters in Mongolia are cold and long. Bitterly cold on the outside, these tents, or yurts as they are called, are astonishingly warm and comfortable. This yurt was one of many here, a kind of permanent settlement near the capital of Hoeyot. When we think of China, it is difficult to visualize the sheer scale and breadth of that enormous land and the rich variety of peoples and climates that are embraced within her borders. Now, 1,500 miles to the southwest in Yunnan province, we are in the tropics. In the area where we stayed, close to the borders of Burma and Laos, only 3% of the population are Hans, whom we call Chinese. 97% are Thais, Hanis, Pulong, and Lahu peoples. We spent most of our time in one of the Thai villages called Mengtsai. About 150 people live in this village. The pace of life in these villages is slow. The people go about their work with unhurried grace. Their manner is gentle, shy almost. The basic work, of course, is the raising of food. The country here south of the Ailau Mountains is beautiful. Green and misty and rich with tropical growth. Before the revolution, the minority peoples in this area were appallingly poor, superstitious, and oppressed. Most of them were serfs. 70% of a family's annual produce was taken by the landlord for taxes and rent. The only land they could buy for themselves was the plot in which they were finally buried. Fish is an important item of diet in China and no longer a luxury. The Mengtsai production team grows its own vegetables and fruit. They told me that the vegetables are distributed free to members of the village. I have never anywhere, even in Japan, seen a vegetable garden tended with such care or with such results. tropical climate makes it possible to grow fruit all the year round. Here, as everywhere in China, political education is never neglected. During the lunch break, some of the peasants gather to listen to a party leader reading an editorial that appeared in all the newspapers in China that day. It gives the previous 12 months' production figures and calls for continued unity of effort. One day, we were invited to have lunch with one of the families. They had never seen foreigners in this village before, but we had been there long enough for them to have lost their shyness. They treated us in a most friendly and informal way. The meal was mostly rice, cooked in the Thai fashion in a segment of bamboo, vegetables and tropical fruit. Though the average cash income in this village is only about $40 a year, life appears to have few anxieties and all the basic needs are met. We sat talking with the family after lunch. The father spoke modestly about the progress the village had made in recent years. 13 families in the village, he said, now own sewing machines, and 25 people now have wristwatches. 2 years ago, electricity had come to the village, so now they have a circular saw and 2 electric rice threshers. In order to follow Mao Zedong's teachings about being self-reliant, they had decided, he said, to make the rice drying yard themselves out of local clay instead of cement. He invited us to see the sugarcane cutting and what he called their sugar factory. The growth of these small rural industries is one of the most significant developments in China today. Local communities everywhere are encouraged to set up small industries. They are probably less efficient than larger centralized plants, but they enable millions of China's peasants to learn for the first time some productive skills, however simple. They also provide employment during those seasons when there is little agricultural work. In this way, China is avoiding the chronic underemployment, which is one of the main problems that face other peasant countries. They collect and break up iron fragments for smelting in a small furnace. And from this they cast metal plowshares and other implements. All this is new, all part of the general policy of self-reliance. Even learning to make their own simple foot treadles for threshing rice is something quite new and exciting in the lives of these peasants. They showed me, rather proudly, the circular saw they bought after electricity had come to the village. They can now, they said, make their own furniture. In these small minority villages, I had a vivid sense of community, as if the people were all members of a single large and affectionate family. Here they are building themselves a village meeting place. This village hospital, too, was built by the peasants themselves. The doctor is not a Thai, but is of the Hani minority, and she's come from the county hospital. The other doctor in this village is what is called a barefoot doctor, which means he has been trained for the simpler kinds of diagnosis and treatment. Simple as this hospital is, it represents a tremendous advance. Formerly, there were no medical facilities here at all. The cost to the peasants for medical services is small. For about 60 cents a year, they obtain full medical coverage. As elsewhere in China, almost all the young men and women belong to the civilian militia. It struck me as being quite significant that China trusts her minority peoples to carry arms. Today, and again this is something new since the revolution, almost all minority children in this region have some schooling. This school serves several Thai villages. Other minorities in the commune have their own schools. These children are learning to read and write Chinese. For them, it's a foreign language. No attempts are made to force the minorities to give up their own languages. In fact, the Chinese constitution specifically states all nationalities have freedom to use and foster the growth of their spoken and written languages, and to preserve their own customs and ways. Sunrise, and it's New Year's Day. These are a group of Hanis who come down from their mountain homes only once a year to take part in the New Year festivities. Peasants from all over this area come to join the celebrations. The favorite means of transport is the bicycle. Seeing these many nationalities, all so different from each other in costume and manner, we were once again reminded how varied the people of China are. While the dancing continues, and it will go on all day, some see what they can buy in the street market. For many, this is the main shopping expedition of the year. We drove over to the county town of Qingtung. Walking through this huge assembly of people, I had a sense of the sheer vitality of China. The old and the young, simple mountain people and the new intellectuals, all sharing a common pride in China and her revolutionary achievements, all sharing an immense optimism in their country's future. For a few brief moments, I felt I almost understood what it must be like to be part of a community that represents 1/4 of all mankind. "500 miles away, in a strange and isolated region of Yunnan known as the Rock Forest, many minorities gather once a year to sing and dance together. These dances seem a far cry from the wide prairie lands of Xinjiang and the cold snows of Mongolia. In too many countries today, minority peoples face discrimination and oppression. It was to me encouraging to see that in China the presence of 50 million minority people is not considered an impediment or threat, but rather an enrichment to the national culture.